All right, so we have a new presentation tonight. Help, do we need the tree doctor? So a lot of folks, who are uh, pretty adept at gardening, they tend to favor their plants more so than the trees. Some people into trees and know quite a bit about them, but a lot of us just kind of love them in the autumn and are happy to see them put their leaves back out in the spring and don't know a whole lot about what's going on up in the crown or down at the root. So recently I was able to get my arborist certification. So that's kind of given me a newfound appreciation for trees. And I learned quite a bit as I was going through that process. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I learned and how do we kind of decide, is this something that we can handle ourselves? Or do we need to call an arborist who basically is somebody who knows quite a bit about trees and can handle some of the more complex things that might pop up? All right, so why do trees matter in our landscape and our lives? Well, they do an awful lot for us, and I think maybe they're kind of underappreciated from that aspect. So, for air quality, obviously, as being a plant, just a very large plant, they're going to absorb carbon dioxide and they're going to give us oxygen through photosynthesis. They can also help reduce some really unhealthy gases. So if we have urban trees, they're actually a real vital component to air quality in a suburban or urban area. Water conservation, that root system in that tree does a fantastic job at keeping soil where it's supposed to be. I know we've all seen in a construction area where they've, plowed up that area and it's just open, just basically a scar in the earth. And then you get a really heavy rain around here, and a lot of that soil ends up in the waterways. Whereas if you see that area before and you get a hard rain, you don't see all that soil in the waterways. And that's because the tree and all the other plants that are there are holding that soil together with its roots. Um, Water conservation, again, they're doing a great job about absorbing some of that water and putting that out through evapotranspiration. They do a great job of kind of climate control, if you think about it. So some places like in Haiti where it was deforested, that almost turned it into a desert climate. It changed the whole ecology of that island. So trees can do a really good job of creating weather, if you will. Wildlife habitat, they're going to provide shelter, food, nesting sites for wildlife. And they also provide us food and all sorts of good stuff. So they're an integral part of the ecosystem. Aesthetics, most of us are going to have some kind of a specimen tree or a tree we've planted in our property. Sometimes we pick them because they have flowers at certain times of the year. Sometimes we pick them because they have fruits. Sometimes it's for fall color, or sometimes it's color all year round. So we can really enjoy what trees have to offer us for aesthetics. Economic benefits, they're going to increase property values. Now, if you had the option of purchasing a newly built home that had a tiny little 5-gallon tree in the front yard versus a big towering 100-year-old oak that shaded your house and looked really pretty, which would you prefer? I think I'd probably pay more for that house that had that 100-year-old oak than I would one that had a 5-gallon tree on it. So they can really increase the property value. They also can add all sorts of colors and textures and depths to our landscapes. So folks that know what they're doing and come up with a really good landscape plan and are incorporating trees in that, those folks can command more for those properties. Health benefits, they're going to purify our air. They're going to combat climate change, if you believe in that. They're going to provide housing to all sorts of species, insects to animals, and even us sometimes, if you have a tree house up there. They're going to cool streets and cities and houses because they're shielding the sun with their leaves. They're going to protect against floods by absorbing that water, and water pollution. They're going to help clean that and ease our mind during stressful times. I know there's been plenty of time in my life where I've gone and hung out and maybe sat up against a trunk of a tree and read a book or laid on a blanket, and there's just kind of a certain peace of mind for that. I know most of us would probably rather do that than lay in a parking lot. It'd be a lot cooler anyway. All right, so who is the tree doctor? Well, some of you may know, some of you may not know, but somebody who is a specialist in tree care is going to be called an arborist. They're trained and certified professional, and there are all sorts of different levels of that too. So the base level is the ISA Certified Arborist, and that takes a minimum of being in the industry for 3 years just to qualify to take that test. So you have to actually apply to take the test, and they can turn you down if you don't have enough experience. So the test itself is pretty rigorous, and I had to study quite a while for it. And I did pretty good, but there are a lot of people that it takes, it could take them half a decade or so to get to the point where they feel comfortable. But that's going to include all aspects of tree health, including the pruning, the trimming, diagnosing of diseases, treating diseases and pests. They have to have a very deep understanding of tree biology and all the environmental factors that can affect that. So why are they important? Well, tree health, they're going to assess the health of the trees and recommend treatments to keep them healthy. They can ID pests and diseases and safety. So trees pose an inherent risk. So if the tree's out in the middle of a pasture, it's probably not going to have a lot of risk. But every tree in your neighborhood sure does. So, arborists are trained to be able to identify that when they're diseased or damaged, and they can recommend things that can be done, such as pruning particular limbs or even just removing the tree entirely if they need to, pruning and trimming. So they're going to know the proper ways of doing that, and ways that they can work with the tree biology so that the tree can heal itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. They can tell you the best ways to prune and give you education on how to do that, and also in planting. So if you've got a new property and you want to do a bunch of planting, they can give you some recommendations on species. They can also come out and suggest where you should plant those trees and when, that kind of thing. So maybe you have a landscape architect that's coming up with a plan. Having an arborist on staff is a really good idea. So DIY versus professional tree care. So there are a lot of things that you can do if you want to save money on hiring an arborist. So as you could see from the first slide, I actually am a certified arborist at this point. So I'm listed on the ISA website. And my specialization is diagnostics. So as a person who works for UGA Extension, if you have problems with your trees and you're trying to figure out, is your tree on the way out? Does your tree need help? I do what I call triage. Yes, pun intended. It's kind of funny. I always like that kind of stuff. Anyway, I do that kind of thing where I tell people to send me your pictures and I take a look at what they've sent me. I can tell a lot from a picture. I usually say, let me look at the trunk all the way around, the crown of the tree, the root ball, the area around the tree. If you take a step back, and then I ask the history. How long have you lived in this house? Has anything odd been going on? Because the particular symptoms can be very obvious when you know what you're looking for. And knowing that, I can kind of tell, do I need to refer this person on to an actual treating arborist so that they can get some help? Or is this something that they can handle, or that the tree needs to be taken out? So for instance, when you're going to DIY it, that's just pruning small branches. So let's just say you want to raise the level of the tree so you don't hit your head when you're cutting the grass. So you're going to trim away small dead or low hanging branches. That's perfectly easy to do. Most people are going to be able to do that. Those branches don't pose a whole lot of risk. So it's pretty easy to actually do that yourself. Mulching. A lot of you already know, and we'll talk about the mulch volcanoes here too, but mulch is going to help retain moisture. It's going to keep that soil temperature down and prevent weed growth. We almost always recommend that you have some kind of an island around your tree so that you can protect the trunk and all the other things I just mentioned. Watering, well, regular watering, you want to make sure you do that, especially after you plant your tree. And even in times of drought, like it's been kind of dry lately. So if you want to give your trees a little, burst of hose water, that's perfectly fine. I'm sure they're going to appreciate that. Moving into the fall, it's not as necessary, but right now they still can appreciate that if you want to do that. Removing small weeds and grass. A lot of people don't realize, but when you put your sod all the way up to the trunk of the tree, that grass is actually in direct competition with that tree. That root system isn't very far. It's only about 8 inches or so below the soil level. And as that tree gets bigger and those roots, you see them at the top of the soil line there, you have a lot more feeder roots that are deeper down, but 8 inches is about it here in Georgia. So when you put that grass on top of those tree roots, direct competition. That's why we always recommend that you have some kind of an island around the tree and that you're putting mulch or something down, pine straw, that kind of thing. Basic disease and pest management. So we're going to go over some of that stuff here so that you can identify when you might have a problem. And if you do, then hopefully you'll understand that, hey, maybe I should give an arborist a call, or you're always welcome to call Extension and we can kind of work with you on that. So here we'll kind of help you ID some of the things that might indicate that you have some type of a pest or disease problem. Professional tree care. So these are the things that you would need a professional for. So large or high tree pruning, it's very dangerous. I know some people don't want to pay that money, but I mean, if you've got somebody who's willing to go all the way up into the crown of a tree and trim that branch down, do it safely and get that limb down to the ground without it falling on your house, it's worth every penny. So, and it's definitely worth doing that more so than having storm damage where a tree falls on your house. So just leave the really dangerous stuff to those tree care professionals that are certified and can actually climb those trees and know what they're doing. Tree removal, same thing. Especially in an urban or suburban environment where you're dealing with houses that are really close together or buildings that are nearby, that's very hazardous. And that, again, that's one reason why they get so much money for removing those trees, because they know how to do that safely. And it's well worth the money. You don't want a tree on your house. Disease diagnosis and treatment. Sometimes it's beyond what even we can do. So it makes sense to see the extent maybe of the disease. I can look at something and I can tell you something's not right there. But I may not be able to tell you the extent of how badly that problem may be, or is that tree salvageable, or do you need to go ahead and take that tree out? Because there's a range there. It's not, yes or no, black or white. There's a whole lot of gray in there. So having somebody on site that can do some type of active diagnosis of the tree there can be very important. Emergency tree care. So, tornadoes, severe storms, where you have microbursts where a tree comes down, you have to have somebody come out on site to look at that. If your tree splits down the middle and I see a picture of that, I can tell you really quickly that tree's probably not salvageable, but there are a lot of instances where they are. So having somebody on site to actually look at that tree, trim it up, and do it the correct way is very important. Root health and soil management. So they're going to be able to assess the root system. They're going to be able to assess the root plate and determine whether or not that tree is doing well based on what they see. Preservation, restoration. There are a lot of historic trees. Think about maybe down in Savannah, all of the live oaks that are down there. So, yeah, they have an arborist on staff and that person is constantly doing things to help preserve those trees. A lot of trees, there's a lot of history. You have a lot of champion trees. Those are very old and very special trees to the area. And they're usually very good specimen trees. you don't want to lose those. So having somebody to help take care of them as they're going through their life is very important. And lastly, tree planting and species selection. So I think I alluded to that before, but putting the right tree in the right place is very important. So you want to make sure that you have somebody that knows what they're doing to help you select a tree. Okay, so indications of an unhealthy or dying tree. We're going to go through a bunch of different things that you can look at, and will help you decide, do I do this myself or do I hire somebody? So, recognizing major tree problems, and that's going to be like disease, wind, lightning, physical damage, age. Young trees are pretty resilient and can handle an awful lot of damage, whereas older trees cannot. You can only really ever remove somewhere between 15 and 20% of an old tree before you end up in decline and then have to remove that tree. There can also be lots of rot that's harbored in there, basal rot in the trunk or heartwood rot, like you see in some of these pictures. You may not know about it, but there may be some hints, and that's kind of what we want to kind of allude to here in this presentation. So some things to look for. If a tree has more than one trunk, we call that a codominant stem. Some of the biggest problem makers around here are going to be your Bradford pears. A codominant stem is like what you see down there on the left. That's where you have two trunks that grow together, but you have included bark in the middle. That means that tree is not very strong and that it doesn't take very much before you end up with a heavy weight on the branches. Usually, I'll just use Bradford pears, about 30 years old, 25 to 30 years old. And you get a good storm that comes through the area that's whipping those branches around, and those things will split in half like a rotten watermelon. I mean, it's ridiculous. So that's why they're not recommended to be planted. But you can see a codominant stem in just about any type of tree. That is not a good way to I guess, have a tree in the landscape. There are things you can do. So if you have a nice old oak tree or something else that's getting big and it's past the point where you can do pruning, there are things an arborist can do to secure those two trunks together, and cabling them together to help prevent that from happening. So just know that that's why you want to hire an arborist if you have a tree that you want to save. You might see a tree that's leaning and you see a kind of a mound of soil nearby. That's called heaving. Generally, that means you've got some root problems, and you definitely want somebody to come out, a professional to come out and take a look at that. If you have a hollow cavity somewhere in the base of the tree or even further up, rot is characterized based on the area that it's located. So in this case, if it was in the trunk, it would be basal rot, which would be the trunk area down towards the ground, or maybe heartwood rot, which would be the heartwood in the middle of the tree. So if the trunk or root system has been damaged, and lawn equipment can do a lot of damage. You can see up at the top, that's a string trimmer. So you can see it's really chipped away at the base of that tree. And I can tell you right now, if that's over 50% damage, your tree's probably not going to live for its full lifespan. It can't. There's just no way it can. It needs, and we'll talk on one of the slides going forward, we'll talk about that. But basically, after about 50%, it doesn't have the circulatory capacity to pull water or nutrients up or down to support it past a certain point. When a root system's been damaged, sometimes people, well, you end up with what you got up on the top, but people also might put mulch around the tree. And you can see here on this particular tree that they did that. That isn't always a good idea, especially if you do more than about 2 inches. That's about the max. We call that the mulch volcano. I don't have any cute little volcanoes on this one, but you can see they've dug away. And what you see down here at the bottom, that's what happens when you put the volcano mulch on. So first of all, you can see it's covering up the trunk flare. That's that flare down at the base of the trunk. So what they've done here is they've used an air spade to excavate out. That tree's put down some adventitious roots. So it's just sending out random roots because it thinks it's underground. It's not. And that bark is not made to I guess, seal out fungal or bacterial organisms. So it's much more susceptible to disease and fungal organisms and animals. You can get little voles that will, the little voles that'll come in and gnaw on that bark around that tree. So girdling roots, I'm sure we've probably all purchased a tree or a plant from a nursery. We didn't check the root system and it had one root that had encircled the entire thing. And then we just put that thing in the ground. And then so many years later, we ended up with something like the top left picture. That's a girdling root. And it's a shame. Those trees don't live very long. They basically cut off or they grow into the cambium area there and cut off life support, essentially, similar to what that guy wire down there on the bottom did. So, you also want to be careful about putting trees too close together because you don't want them to run out of space. That also means that they're competing for nutrients and for water. So we see a lot of pictures of that where people ignore the planting spacing and they just put them because they want them to grow fast and full. Well, they're not going to do that. They're going to die soon. So, you can't just skip ahead of the line. You have to wait for them to grow properly. And then, like I said on the bottom, the guying or tying ropes around there, that is a standard practice. There is research that shows that you really should remove those after about a year. So the swaying that you get from the wind actually strengthens the trunk and allows that tree to be a stronger tree. If you leave those guy wires in place, that tree then basically doesn't create that reaction wood to make it stronger. And so it will be weaker. Not to mention the fact that if you completely forget to take those wires off, you end up with something like this where it grows around it, girdles it, cuts it off, and it dies. So if the leaves of a tree are yellow or brown, spotted, curled, or wilted, some tree diseases are not fatal. And a lot of times it's simply just a fungal leaf spot. It's not a big deal. And it's just a garden hygiene measure. And we'll tell you, make sure you rake those leaves up and get them off the property because they have the fungal leaf spores. The fungal spores on the leaves. But some tree diseases are fatal and it can take months or years for the tree to die. So depending on what it is will depend on what we recommend. And sometimes you're going to get abiotic or environmental symptoms. And so we had a lot of freeze damage from the cold weather last year. And we got a lot of people in April and into early May that were reaching out to us going, why do my tree leaves have this edge of brown? Is my tree going to die? What disease is it? Well, it wasn't disease. The leaves were scorched from the cold weather. So that's called abiotic damage, and it's not biotic or caused by an insect or a microorganism. So if your tree loses its leaves out of season, especially on one branch, that can be storm damage, it can be disease or pests. Typically when a tree is alive and healthy, if it's going to drop its leaves, if its leaves are going to turn brown, they're going to drop off the tree. If the tree retains its leaves, then that probably means that branch died pretty quickly. And as I said, it could be disease or pests, could be lightning. You see that in the bottom there. That basically causes the sap in the tree to instantly boil. So that's not a good thing. That means that, that tree will likely be on its way out just simply because it's had a large injury. So checking your bark for damage. Here we've got a variety of animals, and they all can cause damage to trees. So you have squirrels, they'll chew on the bark. Chew too much, and you've chewed through the cambium layer, and that's where all of the nutrients and the water circulates. So without that, you have no way for that tree to be alive, do you? You see that deer, that's we're starting to get some pictures in of the suburban deer problem that we have around here. You get those bucks and they're now starting to shed the velvet off their antlers. So they will find themselves a tree, just like you see this buck here, and they'll rub against that tree to get that velvet off and also to leave their scent behind for any females or other male deer. So that also will conveniently rub off the bark and the cambium area underneath to the heartwood. And so too much of that and the tree dies. So this is the cambium area here, and you can see that that buck has basically rubbed all the way through to the heartwood, which is in the middle. You can see the holes in the bark from insect borers, woodpeckers, sapsuckers, and you get too many of those. And again, that hits that cambium layer, and there's not enough surface area there to carry all the nutrients for the size of the tree. So you can do a scratch test, just like you see this little sapling down beneath that area. Use your fingernail or a knife to kind of remove a small strip right there, and check that cambium layer. If it's still living, it'll be green. If it's not, it's probably dead. So using excess mulch around the tree, I mentioned that before, mulch volcanoes, and that can end up with a decreased oxygen supply to the root system. Similar to if you put too much soil on there, we'll talk about compaction in a bit, and that can result in tree death and decline. You can end up with the adventitious root formation, which you see right there. And you don't see much root flare, trunk flare there, and that's because those are all adventitious roots. Somebody had a lovely mulch volcano, similar to the one next to that, and you had an arborist that came out and used an air spade to excavate all of that away, and those are the roots that have formed since then. And then you can also see rodent damage here. So we have a lovely little meadow vole. When you have snow or mulch or something else that's piled up against the branches or the trunk, these little guys will come in and gnaw away at the root system or whatever they can reach. So it's also very important not to do that because of the voles. You've got armillaria root rot, which you can see with the shrooms down below. That's in the soil naturally, but all trees and all plants have an immune system just like we do. And if it's not healthy because it's not being supported properly, it's more susceptible to some of these disease-causing organisms and or fungal organisms like this root rot that you see here. That's why it's important to make sure that that tree is well cared for, and that you're not driving your car over the roots, that you're not dumping dirt on the roots, that you're not leaving too much mulch on top of them, that you're not smacking them around with your string trimmer or hitting it with your lawnmower. You've got to take care of them. So severe drought. Here in Georgia, we kind of flip-flop back and forth between wet and dry, and it's been kind of dry lately. So trees may do some of what you see here in that top picture, which is they can drop their leaves early if it's late in the year and they've already gotten all of the nutrients that they need to through respiration to make it through to next year. They may start to drop their leaves early if it's dry. And we see that a lot with certain types of trees. The cherry trees will drop them early sometimes. Sometimes you'll see sycamores will drop them early. And same thing with tulip poplars. And sometimes it's all the same species of tree. Occasionally you'll note that in suburban areas, maybe overcrowded conditions, kind of marginal soil, maybe next to a parking lot for excessive heat or more drought stress. Just kind of things to look out for there. Additional signs of drought stress trees are the permanent wilt point. You'll note that other plants do that too, so do trees. And it's important you don't forget that sometimes when we have a really dry spell like what we've got, if you've got some specimen trees out in the middle of your yard, if you're not watering, consider giving them a little blast of water to kind of carry them through until the next rainstorm. But you'll see sometimes yellow leaves, and they'll be that way, and then they'll drop them, kind of like a house plant. Root hairs and small roots might die back, so you might need to baby that tree a little bit going forward. So now we'll talk about some weird things that you might see on your tree or the leaves of the tree or branches of the tree. So these are galls. and we've all seen them. Sometimes we see them in grasses. Usually they're going to be aphids or little wasps or mites or something like that basically burrow in and kind of set up shop and live there. And usually it's just for a season. It's a reproductive thing, but yeah, they can be anywhere throughout the tree. And they may also be fungal or nematodes, sometimes bacteria, as you see there on that leaf. They look like little warts sometimes. And usually those are going to be kind of what you would see in certain environmental conditions that promote that. Just like, what am I trying to say? Just like certain insects have host plants, butterflies, you will also note that the certain insects or the fungi or the nematodes also have host plants. They have particular plants that they prefer to be on that are more susceptible. Generally, it's just an aesthetic problem, and it's not a serious threat to the plant because it only is a certain percentage, usually a very small percentage. So we usually tell people not to worry about it. We don't really, I mean, in the scheme of things, adding a chemical to the environment, probably not warranted here. You can clip it off if you want to and dispose of it. That's fine. But just know that it's just a temporary thing. Pitch or resin. So this may or may not be a problem if you see this. So if you see it running down the trunk of your various species of pine, it could mean that you have some type of pine bark beetle. And there are other signs that you can note, and we can help you with that. Pictures will a lot of times tell us what we need to know, but we'll probably ask you some questions like, do you see holes in the tree? Like if you look down there in the lower left, you've got sapsuckers that are coming around, and they can do a lot of damage if they're on one particular tree. But anyway, we'll ask you some questions about that. But generally, sap isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a way that the tree flushes out whatever is in that hole, and maybe getting rid of some of those disease-causing organisms. But you can also have issues if you have, so this year slime flux on white oaks was a problem. So that's caused by a bacteria that gets into the phloem area, and it basically clogs up the works. So if you can imagine how when you get clogged pipes, you might get a backflow into your sink or your toilet. The same thing happens with the tree. And so you'll get a backflow sap that kind of bubbles out. And because it's warm, you'll have maybe some fermentation. So it smells kind of yeasty and fermented, and the bugs like it. That's usually how most people note that that's going on. And that doesn't necessarily mean the tree's going to die, but it is an indication that there's a problem. Trees are actually pretty cool in that they can compartmentalize the disease organisms. If they are healthy, they are able, through a 4-step process, to actually compartmentalize and grow around that injury or that infection. So they are actually pretty cool. The more you know about them, the more you respect them, for sure. So mistletoe, we have that we have that all over the place. In fact, I just pulled into my mom's driveway yesterday, and she had some in a tree in her front yard. There is just everywhere. So it's a heavy parasite, and it has chlorophyll to make its own food, but it does depend on its host plant for water and other nutrients. So a lot of times you'll see particular trees are heavily loaded, like you see this picture here to the left. Sometimes you'll just see one or two, but the birds usually are, they'll eat the berries and then deposit them around in other trees nearby. So if you have one bunch, you'll probably end up with quite a few. It's going to bloom in late winter as the small white berries. Don't eat those, obviously, toxic to humans. But if you want to go kiss your honey underneath that tree, that's fine. So once it germinates, you're going to get a modified root that kind of penetrates down into the branch or the trunk that it lands on, to tap into that host tree's circulatory system, into that cambium layer. So just a few plants aren't going to hurt a tree, a full-size tree, but if you get a large infestation, it may eventually kill it. So if you need to get rid of it, you're going to want to cut the branch off a couple feet away so that you're not leaving behind any of those penetrative roots from the mistletoe. Or you can cut off the plant and then wrap it with some plastic to keep it just like any other root, any other weed or anything else. You want to prevent that plant from being able to photosynthesize. Mushrooms on your trunk or roots. So sometimes we'll get calls and pictures of what you see on the bottom, which is not a problem. And then sometimes we'll get picture or like what you see in the top left, which is a conch or a, is that turkey's tail? I think you might be able to eat that one, but some of those large conchs that you see, if they're on the trunk or on the roots, that's a bad sign. And that's usually an indication that there's rot, because obviously you've got mushrooms, they're living on that decaying wood. They're decayers, so they're starting to break that wood down. And when you see them like that, that's an indication you've got some basal rot there. That tree is probably not long for this world. Whereas the lichen that you see down below, that's just an indication, usually in normal amounts, an indication that it's just kind of a damp environment. And they're not actually doing anything other than just kind of hanging out on the surface. And that's called a symbiotic relationship. So if you do see something like the top two, that's bad. If you do see something on the bottom, that's not that bad. Compaction. So we get a lot of these, especially when you get some of these subdivisions. People are thinking they're doing the right thing by saving some of the large trees on the site, but what you need is that developer should, but they never do, have an arborist on staff. That person would tell them to have a tree protection plan, a TPP, and that would have told them you need to put a rather large tree fence around the trees that you see here that you're wanting to save, because you didn't, and you rolled all that heavy equipment over the top of them and compacted that soil and put more soil on top of the root system. That tree will probably die in somewhere between 2 to 5 years, which is sad because it could have very easily been saved. Trees can't take heavy equipment on their roots rolling over like that. That compaction crushes the root system, makes the soil so compacted that the root hairs can't go through that. It's just bad news. You can try. If you see that happening within 24 hours and you get that soil off, sometimes you can save the tree. It does not take very long for things to start to break down. So getting that soil off, aerating that soil, using an air spade or getting a pitchfork out there to kind of try to loosen that soil. You just want to make sure that you're not covering those roots, because that tree won't be long for this earth. So as a riparian buffer, there is a reason there are rules and laws for that, governing about 25 feet on either side of a stream where you're not supposed to remove any trees or vegetation, because that's what's holding the soil down and preventing all that soil from the construction from getting into that stream and causing non-point source pollution. So that's also why they have detention ponds to hold, because they're putting all those impervious surfaces, and without the extra trees and the vegetation, all of that water's got to go somewhere. So they're catching that, running it into a small detention pond so that it can slowly infiltrate. But this is the natural way to do it. And so we get pictures from people that clear right down to the edge and put sod there, and the developer pushed the soil and it's just leaning over the roots, and their tree starts to die and they panic and they're like, I only have the one tree. I don't know what to do. Well, it's going to die because they smothered the roots, and, they took out the buffer, which is illegal. And now you're left with the bill of about $2,500 to have that tree removed. So don't mess with the buffer. Leave it alone. 25 feet on either side. If you're up in the mountains, 50 feet on either side if it's a trout stream. Oh, and in case you're interested, I've started using QR codes, so you can read about riparian buffers for wildlife on the left and managing riparian forest buffers on the right. Crepe murder, we've pretty much all been told this, I think, if you're a master gardener, or I'm sure you've probably heard from now, that means don't cut these poor things back to nubbins. That takes away the energy that plant has to grow, and it's having to completely start over from scratch. Most people are also not looking to make sure they're actually trimming or pruning these trees, which they are. They are small trees in the right place. And so you'll see in a little bit here some of the other problems. But here you see the same things. You get what we call water sprouts or epicormic sprouts that pop up. And these are very weak wood. If you ever try to go snap one off after you've done some trimming, that's why they're so weak. They just snap right off. That tree is putting a lot of energy in there. It thinks it's been wounded, and it has. So the best thing to do as it's growing, if you've purchased a house, and as it's growing, shape it to what you would like it to look like, and then don't mess with it anymore unless you just need to do some pruning because it's rubbing or a branch breaks or something like that. Just leave it, and they'll get to be about 20 to 30 feet tall. So they're small trees. They make, great specimen trees in your front yard if you're going to do that, or a street tree. But sometimes people see their neighbors doing it and they're like, oh, I need to do that too. Please don't. Stop the crepe murder. Poor pruning techniques. So if you want to read a little bit more about the proper ways to prune, there's a QR code there that'll take you to a publication. But usually on larger branches, we recommend the 3-step pruning method. You can see that there. So this is the 3-step method. This is for larger branches. So something like 3 inches and up, give or take. And ultimately, this is to take the weight of the branch off so that it doesn't peel back and you don't get what you see in that top left picture where it's peeling back the bark. That just opens the tree up for all sorts of insect damage, and the tree cannot properly heal itself from that. When you do the 3-step pruning method, this allows the tree to actually heal itself in the branch protection zone, which is about right around where that branch collar is. So just some examples of what not to do. You got lion tailing, which is the middle one, where people thin out, maybe vista prune a tree, and then they're left with these little tufts on the end. It looks really stupid, in my opinion. You also see tree topping. You get people that don't know what the heck they're doing, and so they just hack the top of these trees off. Those are called epicormic sprouts, and it looks stupid. It's also a weak growth, and that tree's probably not going to live to its full lifespan because of that. It thinks basically that it's storm damage, so it's quickly trying to replace the leaves and photosynthesize and get more nutrients because it just had a large portion of its crown removed. Don't do that. Heading cuts. This is where you take a limb to a stub, bud, or a branch that's not big enough to regrow. So you're going to get, again, those epicormic sprouts that pop up out of and around. This is not the same as pollarding. You see that a lot over in the UK, in the EU, where it's selectively trimmed so that you get a bunch of those sprouts that pop up time and time again off of the nubbins on the ends of the branches. I don't have a picture of that right now, but this is not the same thing. So don't do that. Don't apply wound dressings. All that's doing is locking in moisture and potential organisms that shouldn't be under there. It is not recommended. It's much better to just clean up the bark around where you did that pruning cut. Even if it's a bad cut, clean it up a little bit, let the tree do its thing. You can see here, heading cut. You can see here, don't do the wound coat. I lost the last one, that the tree is trying to heal itself in that top right picture with the blue arrows. The person who did that prune job went too far into the branch collar. But if it was done correctly, that whole area would be enclosed. So you can see where the tree has tried to heal itself. That's the compartmentalization process. It's a 4-step process. And it begins within about 15 minutes after that prune just happened. So it's pretty amazing how they do that. They wall off the area around the injury to prevent disease organisms from getting in there. Pests. So you can see here, you've got the lovely ambrosia beetle damage in the top left. We had a lot of problems with those this spring in crepe myrtles and in figs and several other trees. So if you start seeing those little toothpick structures coming out of that, whoops, get rid of it, cut it down to the ground. The ambrosia beetle does not affect the root system. So you technically, if it's a fig or a crepe myrtle, you could, Jess Fairman, you're drawing on my screen. I thought I had disabled that. Please don't do that. Anyway, the ambrosia beetle, you can cut those down, burn them, or get them off site. You can see there in the other, to the right of that, you've got the galleries that you will have for all sorts of different type of bark beetles. So they live under the bark of certain trees, and they'll eat their way through and under in galleries. That's what they call those, galleries. And that is what's underneath the bark. And so they eat that whole area out there, basically preventing any nutrients from being able to get up or down that tree trunk, and then the tree dies. And then you also have cankers, which is going to be the one down below. And those can basically girdle or cut off the same nutrient supply just by growing around the trunk or the branch and killing it. So southern pine beetle, an example of what they look like and the galleries that they have. You'll hear munching sometimes if you're sitting up against a trunk. We're just going to kind of run through some of the different animals. You can see down there, there's a picture of southern pine beetle damage. So you usually start with the epicenter of the infection, and then it slowly moves out. I'm going to kind of try to whiz through these. I'm running behind. I got a lot of information. The emerald ash borer. So this is in Georgia now. It only attacks ash trees. It's going to live under bark, making little S-shaped tunnels like you see there above. And you'll get crown dieback. Again, it's basically kind of, cutting off the food supply of the tree, in other words. So getting rid of this is a good thing. That's why we don't want you to transport firewood. If you're going to go camping or you're going someplace to a cabin or something like that, get your firewood there. Don't bring your firewood from home. That's how these bugs get transported around. It's usually because the trees are being transported places where they weren't, and now they are. Ambrosia beetle, so I mentioned those before. They're going to excavate tunnels in stressed trees. That's why you see them in a lot of crepe myrtles, because crepe murder is happening to them. So they're stressed. So you're going to push out the small strings of dust, and they're forming galleries or living like you see there in the middle. The tent caterpillars, these guys aren't necessarily going to kill anything. They do get confused with the fall webworms, but they're pretty much standard. You see both of them around here. They may eat all the leaves. Sometimes the birds get into them. Don't try to torch them. That means you'll probably just set your landscape on fire. A good thing to do, just go up and cut the tent area. That opens it up so the birds can get in there and eat them. The Asian longhorn beetle, that is something that is now a problem here in Georgia. So these guys have gallery holes. You can see here. They attack maples and other hardwoods like ash, birch, and elm. So if you see these, please let us here at Extension know. Take a picture. If you see the galleries, take a picture or save the insect if you see it. That way we can confirm where they are. You basically, once you see them, you probably want to get rid of that tree, burn it, don't leave it on site. Cankerworm, there's fall and spring. Sometimes you'll see that you put a sticky barrier around trees, like what you see here, to catch them. Excuse me. You'll see the eggs that'll be laid in neat rows like you see with the adult above. But basically they can defoliate an entire tree. So if it happens too early, then the tree often can regrow leaves. Later, the tree usually doesn't. So spider mites, these are a problem both on trees and on shrubs and plants. So if you want to read a little bit about them, you can check out that QR code there. But you'll see kind of a little stippling design. So sometimes people think that that's a nutrient deficiency, and sometimes it might be. But if you're seeing signs like this with the webs, it's probably spider mites. And you can check on evergreens, use a white piece of paper, shake or tap the branches, and then you can look for the mites if they fall on the paper. And you can use insecticidal soap or wart oil to kill the spider mite eggs and spray them down to get rid of them. Tree scale, and most of us have probably seen this. There's hard and soft scale. There's different species of it. And pruning and removing is a good idea. You can, if you have soft scale, you can try spraying it with neem oil, but and you can use a systemic sometimes. But yeah, you don't want this stuff in the house if you can get it. I actually got it on a ficus tree that I left out, and it came in the house. Nasty stuff. The hemlock woolly adelgid. We don't really have the hemlocks down here. They're up in the mountains though. And this is a really big problem. And there are some large trees, some champion trees, they actually inject a systemic pesticide in there to protect them. Anthracnose. This is a fungal disease, and it can attack a lot of different trees. Okay, so it's not just one, it's a lot of them. Sycamores, ash, oak, dogwoods. We had a really bad year last year with anthracnose in dogwoods, and we lost a lot of dogwoods. They were super stressed, and a lot of them, it just took them out. They couldn't make it. It's fatal in that particular species of anthracnose. It's fatal in dogwoods. So get the leaves and twigs, get them out of there, increase circulation by pruning, and a preventative copper-based fungicide will also help. And again, you can read this little article on dogwood anthracnose. Laurel wilt disease. I was talking with Cindy earlier about this, and this is the red bay ambrosia beetle. So not to be concerned, it's not the same ambrosia beetle that I was talking about earlier. This is a different one. This one has been down in Florida for quite a while, and it is now moved up and has been found along the coast and into, I believe, Cherokee County. They've actually gotten some sightings there. So the one that we're concerned about up here is sassafras and spicebush. And down in Florida, it's actually threatening the avocado crop. So it's bad because it kills a lot of the host species of pollinators. So swallowtail butterflies, tiger swallowtail butterflies, and then if you like sassafras tea. But it'll do the same thing that you see the other ambrosia beetle do. It'll push the little toothpicks out. You can see in the middle picture that it's killed a lot of the bay tree, the red bay, and there you can see some of it. What it does is it carries a fungus on it, and as it's moving through and feeding, it's pulling that fungus in, which then chokes out the circulatory system in the tree. So don't move firewood. Again, that's another reason why you don't do it. Buy it where you go. And apple scab. So this is pretty common disease. It'll infect the fruit with spots. It looks really gross and they turn brown and black. Nobody wants to buy that. So, best thing to do is make sure you're buying scab resistant varieties of fruit trees. Get rid of all of those fallen leaves before the winter, remove them. Apply the fungicide, get a spray schedule. Any type of stone fruit or apple, plum, anything that you're going to put here outside of blueberries or berries, get a spray schedule. We have really bad problems with insects and fungal diseases and some bacterial diseases. Cedar apple rust, that's another one we see. It's a 2-year life cycle with 2 hosts. You can see you'll get these little squiggly orange looking balls on your cedar trees. If you have them nearby, that's the life cycle up above. You've got to have cedar trees nearby. There's all sorts of stuff in this particular family. Your Bradford pears will actually get cedar apple rust. It's pretty interesting. But apples and your Bradford pears and all sorts of different trees, fruit bearing or not, will be susceptible to this, but it is not fatal. Cankers, there are a lot of different cankers out there. Slime flux on oaks were a problem this year. We had a lot of that. And Pseudomonas, what it's doing is it basically gets into the tree's vascular system and it blocks it. Nutrients can't flow through. It enters through woodpecker holes, storm damage, that kind of stuff. Any place where, there's a ding in the wood of the trunk. Fire blight, that is a problem around here. And if you have a pear tree or an apple tree, you're probably going to have fire blight. It's, more severe in a cool, wet spring. And it basically, insects will come and feed and they get that on themselves. And excuse me. And then we'll move to different parts of different trees or the same tree. And then you'll get that down at the bottom, that characteristic J hook or shepherd's hook infected shoot. So if you see a pear tree or an apple tree and you see a lot of these new shoots come out that have this J look to them and they're dead or dying, that's why. It's fire blight. So pick disease-resistant varieties, prune out using good pruning hygiene with bleach to make sure you get rid of that infected wood, and make sure that you're disinfecting your pruning tools. I know Eric is planning on doing a workshop at some point in the near future with the Master Gardeners Association, so check that out. Powdery mildew, typically it's not going to be fatal. It just looks really horrible. Can look different on different plants. And you can use horticultural oil, sulfur as a fungicide. Phytophthora root rot. This is a soil-borne fungus. It infects a lot of different plants, a lot. And the roots will turn brown and die, and then the upper part of the plant starts to die. And really, you're not necessarily going to know what it is until you pull the whole thing up or get a portion of the roots and send that off to be looked at. But basically, you don't want to go back and plant anything in that same spot because, again, there are a lot of different species of plants that will get infected by it. So just don't put anything back right in that spot. Black knot disease, we see this a lot in, again, a lot of different typo. If you want to read about it, you can use that QR code, but you can find it in plums, wild plums. You can find it just generally all sorts of fruit trees and other types of, trees out in the wild. The wild plums I just think of it. I see that probably more often on plums than anything else, but it is a fungus. So the spores are spread that way through the wind. And you can prune those areas out. It's kind of like a big canker on a tree. Prune it out, get rid of it, and make sure you're using proper hygiene to prune. Keeping your tree healthy. We're almost done. Water them when they're young. They need about an inch, inch and a half of water every week for the whole thing. Don't just sprinkle the top of the tree, the area around the ball of the tree for 15 minutes and call it a day. Don't do that. You need to soak it and make sure that that root system is getting an inch and a half, the whole thing, an inch and a half of rain to keep it alive. You want to keep that tree healthy so that it grows roots vigorously, and 10 gallons of water per week, especially when you're first starting out. They have young trees are really resilient, but if you don't water them, they will die. You see it all the time in all these construction sites where they spend hundreds of dollars on these trees and don't put any type of a system to water them in. It's really frustrating. You don't need to do additional watering after August, except occasionally to supplement. Now, if we go into a really bad dry spell from August and we don't get any rain through October and it's got 90-degree weather, yeah, go ahead and water. You need to do that because those trees will die, and I've seen it. So make sure that if that's the case, that you are still supplementing with water. Make sure you keep some mulch around them. That helps keep that root system moist, and a nice slow release fertilizer. Down at the bottom, you can see the steps. So choosing the right tree, mulching, pruning, fertilization, and proper watering. And the Arbor Day Foundation has a really nice website where you can learn all about how to do that, care for trees. You can hover over that and it'll take you to the Arbor Day Foundation. And looking after young trees again, you want to keep the weeds away. You want to make sure that you're not using a string trimmer to knock the bark off that tree and kill to basically a slow death on it. You want to not use herbicides or pesticides right around that root zone, and use some type of physical protector. Again, like I mentioned, we've got deers that are out there, they're in rut, and they're going to use those small saplings to rub their antlers on. So you do that, you're going to have to remove the tree. And you can see here again, I just make mention the guy wires. Get rid of those after about a year, and your tree will be a stronger tree for it. Remove dead or dying branches of the tree, prune those out. And again, older trees are not as resilient as younger trees, just like with people. Kids, much more resilient immune system than an older person is, and the trees are the same way. So you can't take as much out in an older tree. Thin out areas that are thick in a tree. Make sure that you're pruning areas out from the interior so that there's some airflow that helps prevent disease issues. Prune out obstructions, maybe raise the height of the tree underneath in the scaffold branches, and that's going to help to give some, so that you don't, number one, don't run into it when you're out cutting the grass, but that's going to help with airflow. And remember the rule of thumb, never remove more than about 25% of a tree's branches about every 2 years, and that even goes with young trees. Pruning time is critical, so trees that bloom before June 1st, prune after they bloom because they're going to bloom off old wood. And trees that bloom after June 1 can be pruned before spring growth because they're going to bloom on that new wood. And that's it. So this is me. If you have questions about this particular presentation, you can reach me at that phone number and that email address. That QR code goes to our website where we have classes from time to time, and also Family and Consumer Sciences does classes. And that is my arborist certification number. So I'm legit. And I'm going to go ahead and take any questions if anybody has any. Does anybody have any questions? You can either type them in the chat box, or if you want to unmute, you can do that. It's very quiet. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Anything, anybody?
Lisa, I have a question for you. This is Pat McCarty.
Hey,
I have a dogwood that I bought, and the top of it is a white dogwood, and the bottom of it is with a separate branch, and it's a pink dogwood. And I'm concerned the portion that's higher, that's the white dogwood, they bloom at different times also, about a month apart, maybe even 6 weeks. Do I need to prune the top?
did
It's
you buy
about,
it that way, or was this a surprise to you, or did you buy it
I
knowing
bought,
that?
I didn't know it. I bought it as a pink dogwood,
Okay,
and the top is twice the size as the pink dogwood, The
so
white,
your pink dogwood probably blooms first and then the white later.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you probably have um the pink version of the flowering dogwood, and then you have Cornus Florida, which is or sorry, Cornus Cusa, which is the Cusa dogwood that tends to bloom later. Excuse me. It blooms later in the season. It's one of the last to bloom, almost sometimes into June, and it can tolerate more light than the flowering dogwood, which is an understory tree. That one is a native to Georgia, and that one can't really do well in full sun. So it's interesting sometimes when you get these plants from the nursery, they get mixed up. It could have been that someone was funny and grafted something on. I don't know. Typically, they don't graft. Um, I mean, Coosa dogwoods are generally pretty. I'm just not aware that they would graft a pink dogwood, flowering dogwood onto a Coosa dogwood. That would be really odd. Not to say that that can't happen, but it sounds like you've got a Coosa dogwood and a pink flowering dogwood. Um, you can take a picture of it and you can email it to me if you want to do that. I'll put
I'm
my email address in there. I'd like to see if the vegetation's different.
okay. Yeah, it is. And what I'm really concerned about is the top it's twice the size as the limb that has the pink.
Yeah.
And
You can prune the pink out, or you can try pruning because the Coosa dogwood's a little bit more of a vigorous grower. It's a faster and more vigorous grower. So at this point, how many years old is it?
probably 9 years
Okay.
old.
Yeah, it's probably already got a kind of a set structure. You can do some light pruning on it to shape it, but cutting out the white part is going to be really difficult at this
Well,
point
I like it
because
the way it is, but
okay.
I'm just more concerned that it's going to die or something's going to
No,
happen to it.
I
Okay.
mean, it's unusual what happened, but I would say just shape it up and kind of let it do its thing. For a while there, the nursery industry thought it was cool to to graft all sorts of different plants. So you could buy butterfly bushes, the red, white, and blue ones. They would just take white ones, kind of a mauve color and a darker purple, and they would put all those plants together in the same pot and call it a day. And so people would have those, and some people bought them and didn't realize that's what they had. So they were surprised when they had three different colored blooms. It happens sometimes, a lot of times actually. So I would just say shape it up how you like it and enjoy it. The two different colors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions? Going once, going twice. This has been recorded, so I will put this up on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and you can check out the QR codes there if you didn't get a chance to see them while I had them up here, and do a little bit more. I did have to kind of scoot through pretty quick towards the end, but anyway, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate everyone who showed up, and hopefully you learned a little something more about trees. Thank you. Have a good night.